Welcome back to the 8-Sit Velo podcast. This is 8-Sit Velo number 36 already, and it is June 11th, 2020. We are about to get the season on the road. I'm joined tonight by Henry Winkelhake and Zach Diamond. There's a couple of proposals that happened recently between Major League Baseball and the Players Association. Baseball, the owners, and Manfred, the commissioner, and baseball itself, they offered a 76-game, 75% prorated salary. The Player Association counter of 89 games, fully prorated. Fellas, what was your first original thoughts on these two proposals?
Well, my first thoughts was that it was kind of a nice financial concession in the MLB proposal. I was trying to do a little bit of prorated salary math. And I guess the previous offer had been around 30% of the full season salary. And the way I crunched it out, I got this would equal out to 35% if you're doing 75% of the prorated salary across 76 games. So it's encouraging in that regard that they're moving closer financially, was my first impression. Zach, what'd you think?
So my initial reaction was I'm pretty disgusted by the MLB. After seeing all these negotiation stuff, I don't think that anything less than the prorated salary should not even be considered, like at all. Until the players get the money that their employers agree to when they sign their contracts, I don't think they should play, honestly.
Well, there was that clause on March 26th, or at least the owners claimed to it. No one really knows for certain about how if there's no fans in the stadium, then they can maybe opt out of that prorated salary. And we'll get to that later about whether or not there should be fans around the stadium, but at least the owners are moving somewhat in the right direction with adding a little bit more money. And now the players are also doing their part. They went from 114 games to 89 games. It seems as if the two sides are getting closer to a deal, and worst comes to worst, we'll have a 50-game season, which doesn't seem all too bad.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I wanted to say I do agree with Zach that I don't think the players necessarily should have to take an additional pay cut. They already agreed to one in March, but the owners seem pretty adamant that they are not going to do 100% prorated salaries. But just I am encouraged still to see them moving closer. Another piece I thought that was interesting about this was the playoff bonus thing, to where it's not guaranteed money for the players. This is in the league's proposal, to where if the playoffs ended up being canceled, the players would only get 50% of their prorated salaries. And keep in mind, they want 100, so it's hard enough to get them to agree to 75. I thought that was kind of bogus that the league is going to try and socialize that risk, so to say.
Yeah, no other sports league has had any issues restarting their leagues. There's been no labor disputes, nothing. And the MLB should be embarrassed that it's been this long back and forth, like to restart the season.
It is pretty amazing because everyone liked how it was encouraging in May that the owners and players were talking and they were building off that March agreement. What a difference a month makes, you guys. Because just a totally different ball game. No pun intended there. even though that does fit perfectly. But they're at odds. There could be a possible strike. It almost has seemed as if the entire month of May was a complete waste for baseball. And only now it seems like Manfred will say, hey, if you guys don't get anything done next week, I'm just going to lay down however much I want of a prorated season. You're just going to have to deal with it.
And I thought it was interesting, too, to see Manfred come out and say, I think it was yesterday, he 100% guarantees that there will be baseball this year, which I guess he is alluding, like you said there, Adam, to that the league can go ahead and set a 50-game season, that they claim they do have that power from the March agreement. They probably do. That seemed like something that could blow up in his face. Like, oh, yeah, you 100% guarantee it, Manfred? Well, now we're going to strike.
I would love that. I think it would raise awareness throughout the entire sports world that, like these sports leagues can't just take advantage of, they can't use this excuse of a pandemic to just diminish the labor rights of the players in their league. The Major League Baseball made $10.7 billion in revenue last year. there's no reason why the players should be paid less than what they agreed to in their contracts in terms of like the rate in which they be paid. I don't think the players should budge until they get paid at the same rate that they would have been paid before the league, before the pandemic hit.
I really don't see how anyone cannot side with the players right now. There's so much hate on Twitter about the players just being too selfish right now, and it even gets worse when players are speaking out, such as Trevor Bauer, Blake Snell, or Bryce Harper. They're just going at their life, not literally, of course, but it's just terrible because at the end of the day, they shouldn't take that extra pay cut. At the end of the day, the owners have shown to be kind of in the wrong here by offering a similar deal several times in a row, by cutting over 1,000 minor leaguers, and the players have said, plain and simple, we want the season to start. The owners, however, might just want Manfred to bail them out. So, and they're the ones who are kind of limiting a longer season. And just to add one more point, I don't get how they could lose money this season. The next season they come back, they'll get all that money back, if not more. Or they could allow some fan attendance, so they'll make that money up anyway. And that's my 2 cents on how the owners are just awful here.
You hit the nail right on the head, Adam. And one of the latest Passan articles, he mentioned he did a bunch of math and broke it down to it's basically $300 million, I guess, is kind of the difference between the two sides here, which is a significant amount of money. But in the grand scheme of the baseball economy, Zach, you said, what, $10.7 billion last year? Like, that's kind of a drop in the bucket. Like, can't you just get it done and then go back to making your billions upon billions next year? It's ridiculous.
Right. The penny pinching and making a whole big deal out of, comparatively, pocket change to the league. Like it just makes them look so bad. Like clearly they're not interested. Like their priorities here are not baseball or playing the sport. Their priorities are very clearly, how much money can we like make out of this, and like how much can the league benefit from like the current situation.
I know I gave that whole rant off the owners, but to play devil's advocate here just a little bit, it is tough, and it's not a great business model when you're losing money every single game. And the more games they play, they might lose more money. So I can understand it from that perspective. But the fact how, in this regard, how you both have mentioned, it's chump change for them, how they'll earn this money back, how there still could be the possibility of fans in the stadium, how the players and the player association have been offered to build on that postseason revenue, so which the owners will just pretty much take all to themselves. They're trying to be cooperative. The owners are not, and it's really showing how different the two sides are right now.
And you talked about it too, Adam. I don't get how people are somehow siding with the owners on this when they are the side that wants less baseball, that wants less games, that's trying to make the players agree to a second pay cut. And for what? And I'm borrowing a lot from Passan here. Passan. I really should know how to say this by now. What is it? How do I say this man's name?
I think Passan.
I think Passan's a fair.
Yeah. Well, go with that.
We're moving forward with Passan, but he made the point that for years the owners have privatized the gains that the game has seen, that baseball has become more and more profitable, and the salaries of the players have stayed pretty much flat. And then now this comes around and you're trying to socialize the losses and make the players agree to an extra cut and make them take on some of those losses when you're not sharing any of the gains. And that is just not fair at all. So I don't get how anybody could really side with the owners on this.
This narrative that the owners are, and that the media and the owners are like almost getting away with pushing, that the players are the ones being selfish here because they're trying to like, hold on to their millions or whatever. Well, hello, what about the MLB? Is it not selfish and greedy for them to arbitrarily say, yeah, we're going to actually pay you less than what we even agreed to pay you in the first place? Like, to me, it doesn't really matter how many games they play as long as players' salaries are 100% paid. that their rate of compensation does not go down from seasons before. So
that's a good point. Players have always been paid on a season-long basis, and it only makes sense if the season's cut short that you get played on a per-game basis. And honestly, it might come to bite the owners in the butt on how they were offering to socialize their postseason revenue or just or socialize the revenue in general. Because what if the MLB Players Association now wants a cut of that? They never offered that before.
Yeah, exactly. If we're doing this when times are bad, then you guys better do it when times are good too.
Yep.
And then you add on to the fact of how the players are the one going out there, and it took them pretty much 3 months for them to come to some sort of agreement like, hey, high-risk players don't have to be put into this category. They can opt out of full service time and full season pay, or however much the prorated play. And they're still actually debating right now whether or not low-risk players with perhaps high-risk family members or low-risk players who just don't want to take that chance, they still haven't agreed upon if they will get service time or full season pay.
And I think that's kind of a tricky question because, I do think you have to draw the line somewhere because, everybody, you can go like deep down the family tree. Everybody has a grandma that could be at a higher risk just because of their age. I guess some people's grandmas have passed away. I shouldn't be disrespectful in that regard, but you know what I'm saying, that, everybody knows somebody that has some level of risk. So you do have to draw that line somewhere. I do think it's at least encouraging that who they've classified as the high risk individuals, that they are guaranteed full pay and service time. That's at least one piece that they've got right here. And the rest of it is pretty muddy.
I'm concerned about I'm not really concerned, obviously, about the health of the players because, the age bracket, they're in, they're some of the best. They're in some of the best physical shape in the world. So I'm not concerned about them getting sick necessarily. But what about the coaches who are all, older gentlemen like Dusty Baker? Like, I don't know how old he is, but, like,
I think he's like 90.
Right. Like there's coaches, there's team personnel, there's members of the media, there's the workers who work in the stadiums who will clean the locker room and like all this. There's a lot more at play than just the players and their health and safety. I don't know how they're going to account for those.
I think it was. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, I was done.
I think in the health and safety proposal, and maybe it's been changed a little bit, there was different tiers of who would get these tests back, and players were like tier 1, and then coaches were tier 2, and then everyone else, media, hotel staff, were tier 3. So obviously, maybe not everyone should be placed in those different tiers. That could be something debated. Nonetheless, those guys will get tested too. At least that's what it seemed like in the original document. That could have changed. And at the very least, it does seem like they are caring at least in more detail about health and safety. My point earlier was more about how it just took them so long to realize that and so long for them to really come up with a solution, which took them like 2 seconds, it seemed like.
It did seem kind of to be an afterthought, at least at first in these negotiations. And maybe we kind of have started to forget about that again as the financial battle has dragged on. But I do want to move us forward in our conversation here, guys. So I'm gonna raise a question to the floor. Do you think that the MLB is going to be willing to reach a reasonable compromise, or are they kind of just sitting back and are they just all in on 50 games?
I have no clue if the MLB will budge. I have no clue if there's going to be a season. If they're not willing to pay their players a full prorated salary, then I don't see it happening because I don't see the players budging on that.
I think what the owners are going to do is they're still going to try to fleece them in some sort of way. There's no way the owners will give them fully prorated unless it's like a 50-game season, which no one really wants. I think if they go as high as 80, they'll maybe raise the stakes up to as high as 40% of a full season salary. at that point, I think the players should budge just a little bit. They don't have to, and they very well might go on strike. Even if they have a 50-game season, they only get 33% of the pay, which to them would not feel right. That's another reason why I don't think Manfred should say baseball is 100% happening, because players' union probably still has the right to go on strike if they feel they don't get the right deal.
Yeah, I think that 100% might have been a little bit too optimistic for Manfred. But I do agree with you, Adam, too, that I think that I'm sorry. I kind of just got lost in my thought there, guys. I am terribly sorry. I had a major brain fart on set here. But I agree. I think the owners have pretty clearly – they want as few of games as possible, and they don't really look like they're going to negotiate just out of the goodness of their heart. I do think that any concession we see from the ownership side may be more looking forward to the new CBA coming in 2021 and trying to just build a little bit of momentum in those negotiations so that they're not quite as ugly as this has been. That's my 2 cents. Sorry for the brain fart there, fellas.
Adam, I think you mentioned how like no one wants a 50-game season. I totally agree. I love baseball. I'm dying to watch some baseball on TV. But a 50-game season, it just seems a little pointless and kind of desperate. Like, I think that it's like we're talking about a 50-game season. I think they should just take the year off and then, start on time next year. Like, a 50-game sample is just way, way too small of a sample. Like, I don't think these – I'm a Mets fan. Let's say the Mets win the World Series this year. Like, no one's going to take it seriously. Like, no one's going to – there's going to be issues with legitimacy. And I feel like there will always just be, like an asterisk next to whoever wins. Because, it's a 50-game sample. Like, the Nationals went like 19-31 over one of, it's just not indicative of a team's abilities or not.
There seems to at least be a general consensus that if there's at least half of the games, it's somewhat legitimate, because those extra 30 games matter. They'll weed out the teams that shouldn't be there. And if I say your team, I am sorry, but this is just true. You're just not a playoff team yet. That'd be the Pirates, the Marlins, the Tigers. I'm not saying your team. I know you're embracing yourself, but these are like the teams who are completely out of it.
Okay.
Not the Cubbies, but the Tigers, the Royals, the Orioles. Yeah.
The bottom tier.
Exactly.
Yeah, I was bracing for the worst there. I thought you were going to come at me. But I do get what you're saying, Zach, and that it does kind of put an asterisk on things, and where it's not necessarily a legitimate sample size. I do think expanded playoffs kind of helps address that a little bit, and where you have to beat out 16 other playoff teams to get that World Series. So maybe the playoffs itself, just looking at that, maybe that part is more legitimate than ever. But certainly with 50 games, you do have the opportunity for some scrub teams to get hot and make it in. Nevertheless, if my Cubbies do still end up winning the World Series, I am going to celebrate all the same, and I'm going to shove it in everybody's face. And it's still a World Series to me. And I still want baseball to be played, even if it's 50 games, man. I've got a fantasy baseball team that I've been waiting to draft for like 3 months now. I've invested in this. I need some kind of baseball, so long as it's safe and so long as the players aren't getting exploited.
I agree, Henry. I think the expanded playoffs definitely do help. An 70, 80, 90 game season, I think I would think differently. I just find 50 really small. Whereas, they get half a season in, all right, that's valid to me. Very valid.
Well, if the players do get that 50-game season, you guys, I think there's a decent chance that they will go on strike. I would say this might be too high, but I would say there'd be a 20% chance, because that means they're only getting paid, 30 to 33% of their original salary, which the players have been avidly fighting against. They at least want half. I think that's the budget. If they get 70 to 80 games fully prorated, I don't think they'll complain. I think any less than that. Why give up all that momentum heading to the CBA? Why have this weird World Series? I mean, maybe it'll be more legitimate than the Astros and the Red Sox titles. but it still will feel weird. It'll still be different. Maybe the playoffs will help with that. And just to add on to the playoff part, why 2021 at the playoffs? There's no reason for that. No reason at all.
It's weird. It doesn't really seem to have a whole direct application to getting this deal done. But maybe the thinking is that it's further expanding revenue and having an expanded playoffs next year to where it's like the owners are making some a little bit back in the future. I think that might be the thinking behind it. But I don't think a strike is all that likely, because where I'm looking at it is, even if they do only play the 50 games, if it's still 100% prorated, maybe the players union can kind of frame that as a win. Like, yes, the owners made us play 50 games and that was awful of them, but we didn't back down. We still got 100% of that money. So maybe then that would be a way to avoid a strike.
It definitely seems like expanding the playoffs in 2021 is definitely going to help make up for whatever money they're losing this year by, not having a full season and not having fans in the stadium, missing out on all the concessions money. I do think that the MLB is going off of that. I do think the MLB is taking advantage of this pandemic a little bit in a couple of ways. Like, I think they were planning on gutting minor league baseball anyway the last 2 years. And with this happening, they're like, oh, yeah, we're actually going to go ahead and do this. And also with the universal DH and having players expanded broadcasts, like having players mic'd up and creating a more entertainment aspect to games. I think all these rules are definitely in place because the MLB has the leverage to put these in place, and they wanted these things. And, they'll see it as an opportunity just to make more money.
It really does seem like they're pushing their agenda here, because a lot of diehard fans are wanting the season, no matter at what cost, no matter how many games, or at least they're maybe holding out for some hope that there's somewhat of a legitimate season. So whatever baseball decides to do with it, they don't care at this point. They could have a universal DH. They can have the umpires agree to a temporary solution before they probably will have robot umpires one day, which I'm not a big fan of. They're cutting minor leaguers. They're trying to lessen their salary like the Nationals did if they're not cutting them. It's terrible, and it's annoying, and they're losing fans already from just arguing between themselves and the players. But they're going to lose some fans, too, from all these rapid changes to a great national game.
I 100% agree with Zach that it was suspect at the minimum that they went ahead and kind of did away with minor leagues this year. That definitely looked like something that they wanted to do before. But I don't think all of these changes are necessarily bad. But that kind of could be speaking to the argument, too, that fans are so thirsty to have baseball back that we'll take it in any form whatsoever. Because I'm usually kind of like an NL purist. Like, I don't want a DH, but at this point, like I do just want baseball in whatever form possible, to where they can kind of sneak those things by and then subtly change the game and taking advantage of the situation. But, I think some of those things aren't all that bad. I'm starting to come around to the universal DH, and I don't know. I mean, like, robot umpires is maybe not a great idea. It kills jobs and it gets away from the purity of the game, but they blow some pretty bad calls sometimes. So I see where the league is coming from and some of these changes, but I don't think that it's necessarily right to be using the pandemic to sneak them across.
Fans are powerless to any changes that occur. They're like, we're completely powerless. So any change they want to go through, like, we all want to watch baseball, and we'll make concessions, and we'll go with whatever changes they want to make. I was as a Mets fan, big like National League purist. I've come around to the DH because pitchers can't hit, so I'd actually really support the universal DH. But shrinking minor league baseball, and that was just like so disgusting to me. Like, cutting all those teams. So I forever be disappointed because of that.
Yeah, that made no sense to me. I understand they're trying to cut the Penn League, and I guess they have some basis of maybe doing that, but changing the stipends, cutting minor leaguers at an unprecedented rate. Teams usually let go about 40 to 50 minor leaguers at the end of the year, but that's a gradual process, and that's usually because of players who are not performing or players that are making way for new draftees, not just from owners being penny pinchers, because this is just thousands of dollars, not even millions there. It's terrible.
$15,000 a week per team.
Jeez.
And I want to play devil's advocate just for a second, and that it is a business. And I know that minor league baseball in many places was already struggling to be profitable as it is, to where I can kind of understand where the league is coming from, but it's still not a very good look from a moral standpoint. And we touched on it last episode we recorded, I believe, Adam, when we were talking about how these minor league players are often going on to be coaches and going on to build the game and build up future players, to where you're making an investment in the future of the game in minor league baseball, that it isn't all just about the dollars and cents of today. It is an investment in the future, and it is very unfortunate to see those ties being cut and to see those guys not being supported by the game.
I certainly agree. And baseball has such a huge impact. Actually, when we talked about this, I just talked to a minor league coach from my school. He loves the game with a passion. He likes a lot of the directions they're going, but he felt it was so bad for minor leagues. And it's really tough on the players, too, because they have to change up their styles to new management. They might not get called up each season. It's very hard for them to know if they're being demoted or promoted, or they might have to play through injury just to keep their careers alive. They're in a very tough predicament, and they don't get paid that much already. But just to completely furlough them, and then they also can't really file for unemployment. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I've heard that's a pretty well-known rumor that's been going around. So it's pretty wild, and it's very unacceptable.
Yeah, like the Mets, they're now losing the Kingsport Mets, which is a ball club that has been around for over 100 years. Now, obviously not just with the Mets, with like a bunch of different organizations. And like because of a little money, I think that the MLB, what the excuse that they were using was that by cutting minor league clubs, they'll have more money for the clubs as a whole, and the clubs that remain will have more money to improve their facilities and just have more money for themselves. But you got to think that there are better ways to get money into these minor league clubs and to improve their facilities than simply just having less clubs to do it. There's got to be other ways to do it.
I almost wish the Players Association, like, the owners should obviously chip in too because they're the billionaires. But what if the Players Association just said all players chip in, like, I don't know, $1,000 a month to just keeping these facilities alive? And I bet you they would do it. We saw what the Nationals did for their fellow players. They've all been minor league players too, or at least the vast, vast majority of them. They know what it's like. They know that those facilities are run down. Heck, we're even seeing these crazy names such as the Staten Island Pizza Rats, because just to draw revenue. It's literally the reason why they're like that, so they can sell merch and just have some hope of being alive. It's insane, and it doesn't seem too complicated of a plan to just keep these minor league teams around.
And minor league marketing is certainly some of the finest in the country. The Montgomery Biscuits is another one that comes to mind for me. There's some fun names down there. But certainly even you could have the top end players, your Mike Trouts of the world, who are making, I guess not everybody's making Mike Trout money, but $30+ million. Those guys could probably afford to pitch in a little bit. Maybe you don't require guys making the league minimum to do that, but it would be nice to see some more collaboration. And we have seen some examples around the league. David Price, I don't know if we mentioned him here tonight. He's another guy committed to paying Dodgers minor leaguers. But moving back to the big leagues, if we can, Guys, we've been speaking the last couple, maybe about a month ago, we were talking about how baseball really had a big opportunity to come back and be the first sport back from the pandemic and kind of give people hope and give people something to watch. Have they now completely squandered that opportunity?
Oh, 100%. I think the short term, they would have been able to milk the whole narrative that, America's pastime is coming back to, save our country from, pandemic boredom or whatever. And, they could have milked that now, and they could have milked that long term. How, when they show classics or whatever, they could mention the fact that, oh yeah, that Major League Baseball was here for the country when the pandemic was being hit. But I think other than that, it really doesn't matter at all, and it's not something that I think that people would think about a lot after all this ends. That's just my 2 cents.
I think the most important thing that matters is from all this that the players and owners were at it for such a long time when it wasn't about health and safety, and they're arguing over millions and billions when a lot of Americans are unemployed right now. And I think that's where a lot of the anger and a lot of where fans are leaving at this point. I don't think people care too much about when, like, the exact day baseball was coming back. I think they cared about the reason of how they came back. If it was they weren't playing because of the pandemic, totally understandable. That makes sense. But for money, which no other league is really doing, you can understand why the fans are angry.
You make a great point, Adam, that it comes off pretty tone deaf with so many people out of work to be arguing over this when you have the opportunity to go back to work and to inspire people who love the game and who really need something to watch and to make them happy at night. And I think they completely blew this opportunity. And I agree with Zach, too, that I think it would have been mostly short-term games. I don't think that NBA and NFL fans would have switched over in masses and all of a sudden loved baseball forever. But there certainly would have been some short-term payoff, and that would have been money. And all this arguing is about money, and you're leaving a lot on the table by not being the only sports league back. They completely blew that opportunity.
Adam, it was a great point bringing up the fact that the majority of, with so many economic problems happening to the average person in America, it's incredibly tone deaf, and it looks horrible on the league that there's been such issue over, between billionaires and millionaires, there's these issues between money. No other league had any issues restarting, and I think that if the MLB just restarted without all this issues, I think that itself would have been amazing for the league. No, that's what all, because now everyone is talking about how the MLB is just being greedy and being incredibly tone deaf. That's the narrative, not, oh, we're getting baseball back, woohoo, that. They just ruined that opportunity.
They dragged it on for months at a time. Just the entire month of May was awful. April was a little bit of hope, but now June is just kind of let's just make it happen. And I want to hear both of your takes on this, but maybe in some shape or form that can kind of make it up to the fans if they had limited seating capacity of social distancing guidelines, because I think a lot of fans are ready to come and watch their team play. And I think there's less worry there now than 2 months ago about attending a giant sporting event. And they obviously won't have a full 50,000, but if they have even a couple thousand, I think the vast majority of fans would be on their high horse and they would go to games, and maybe baseball would do them even one better by offering decently priced tickets for once.
I wouldn't count on that, Adam. I think if anything, they charge more with less fans in attendance. They should charge less, but I think if this has shown us anything, it is that greed rules with the owners, especially, and that I think they would charge as much as possible. I think it'd be great if we could have some fans back if it's done in a safe way with social distancing. I think maybe part of it is it's a player safety thing where it looks good for the players if we're saying you guys have these completely empty stadiums to where there's virtually no risk of fans infecting you all. And I guess part of that too is the thought of a second wave and protecting against that, to where if this thing were to start spiking up again, you don't want to have that transmission happening in MLB stadiums. That might be a pretty bad look for the league, and they've had a plenty of bad looks already throughout this whole thing. But if it could happen and could happen safely, man, I would love to go to a baseball game, even if I'm sitting 6 feet apart from somebody, whatever. I think that would be awesome.
Yeah, Henry, I totally agree with your sentiment completely. I personally don't think that the MLB should have fans at the stadium this season. You know, as much as I'd love to be at Citi Field watching some Met games, you know, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and we should be preventing the spread as much as possible. And also comes up, you know, what if we find out that, you know, people who work at the ballpark are testing positive and like giving it to fans and stuff? Like, what you do then say, okay, we're not going to have fans? Or like, it just like logistically, it just seems like a lot of work and a like high risk to do so. Public health, in my opinion, obviously is more important than baseball. And the league should prioritize as little people at the ballpark as possible. If you're going to have games at baseball stadiums, only like essential people should be there. Just because, you know, it's, at least in New York, you know, it's definitely significantly on the downturn, the virus, and it remains to be seen if, you know, reopening will like give us a big second wave. But, you know, I just think there should be aggressive preventative measures at this point right now still. I think it should remain that way. I don't think fans at the stadium is feasible. I saw that like the Taiwanese baseball league, which was the first league to open, they're putting like plastic mannequins and like fake people in the stands holding signs. It's funny. It's cute. I think it like does the job for players at least. And I don't know about you guys, but even if I had the opportunity to go to baseball games, I think for this season I'm gonna stick to my TV just to be safe.
Well, those are certainly fair sentiments, of course. Even if one person got sick or, God forbid, one person died at a game, that would just be terrible, and they'd probably have to not allow fans in the stadium, or maybe even it could even have an impact on the season. So you're very right in that sense. I almost want to hope that they could like take off the field level and just put them in the like the upper levels, and that would be okay. Or it'd be so cool to see teams in the playoffs this year instead of just being at home. Not that that's bad, but just taking out away playoff games, that's unfortunate. It is a special circumstance, though, and there's certainly a lot of good reasons why there should not be fans in the stands this season.
Yeah, I think preventative measures, like you said, Zach, that's definitely a good point. That it is. I think we kind of forget with the economy reopening and kind of how long this all has gone on, that, you know, some people seem to have just decided that like the pandemic is over. We don't have to worry about it anymore. And I think it is encouraging at least to see the league still kind of emphasizing safety here, and that they're not rushing back to get fans back in the seats. And especially knowing that would generate a ton of revenue if they were able to do it. So I'm glad to see them taking a cautious approach there. But, you know, if we can get some good news that the virus continue to go down and continue to look less dangerous, it would really be awesome if, you know, somehow we are able to get fans in the seats for the postseason. That would really be a special environment, like you said, Adam.
Right, and Adam, as you said, if even one person gets sick, or if even one person, you know, dies, I think that's one too many, because it's, you know, over what, you know, like a game of baseball. Mm-hmm. Like, we should definitely value public health over the sport. And if that means that, you know, if it's too much of a risk for people to go on the stands still, then I don't think we should. And it'll be tough, you know, seeing a World Series game and not have fans in the stadium, like that breaks my heart. That should break all baseball fans' hearts. But, I'd rather have a broken heart than a disease. So
I almost wish we could have like the CDC or the WHO say, hey, you can have all these stadiums open and social distancing will be fine and no one will be affected, but you can't guarantee that. You can't even guarantee that with the players. I get it. It's more just hoping at this point than anything else and just for having some miracle. But the good news is we've been through a lot already. If we have to be at home and watch baseball, that'll be the least of our worries right now.
Yeah, it kind of makes me wish I was a Cincinnati Reds fan or something because they never have fans in the stadium anyway. So they're really going to be at a competitive advantage if we get this thing back going with no fans.
Same with the Marlins. There's not going to be any change in attendance for them,
or the Rays for that matter.
Yeah, or the Rays.
White Sox too. We didn't forget about you guys. But I think our final point we're going to make here tonight, fellas, if you had to lay out what the perfect compromise looks like to get back to baseball, what is your perfect compromise? Zach?
Honestly, I wouldn't compromise. If the players don't get 100% prorated salaries, I would not compromise. I think that what the Players Association offered, 89 games and then fully prorated, the MLB should have agreed to that and it should have been done with it. And we should all be thinking about the season starting and not thinking about, oh, look at this BS between the MLB owners and their players. So, I would rather there be no season, honestly, if they're going to have a season in which they're going to shortchange the players. I wouldn't compromise, honestly.
I still believe there is some legitimacy to that no fans argument, and I would like to believe the owners are not fleecing the players in that margin, even though they've fleeced the players numerous times already. So I would say if they say at least 70, 80 games, players take 40 to 50% of the season, what they would make over a full season salary. I think that's reasonable. I think that'd be a good step in the right direction. I think that's the owners. They would say, hey, we're making a good dent here. Can you at least meet us a little bit more halfway? And I know the owners are really in no position to bargain in that regard. It would be nice to see some common ground and as many games played as possible. And I think if the owners had offered a less of a pay cut, that would be almost an olive branch to the players.
And it sounds logical. Like we can sit here and it sounds like it makes sense. And that's really the frustrating part, that it seems like the middle ground is so clear, but there's just still a lot of distance between the two sides and they're inching closer, but we're running out of time too. But for me, what my perfect compromise looks like, I'm thinking 62 games. Hear me out. I know that's not that many. It is more than 50. But 62 games of full prorated salary, so the players can check that box. They didn't back down there. That would equal out to about 38% of their full season salary. So that is kind of a little financial middle ground there. Another piece that I would want to attach to this compromise is something that was in, I believe, both of the players and the league's last proposal. No qualifying offer, having to give up that draft pick compensation. I think that is definitely something that we've seen hurt free agents in recent years, where teams are a little bit more hesitant to go out and give those contracts to guys. Like you saw Craig Kimbrell last year not be signed until June when that qualifying offer wasn't attached anymore. So I think little olive branches like that are definitely helpful to getting this thing done. And in my perfect compromise, I wouldn't want to see this postseason bonus BS. I think just agree to the salary up front and don't make players have to join in that risk of if the postseason is canceled. I don't think that's fair when you're not sharing the rewards that you've seen in recent years with revenue gains.
Well, these are all logically and good sounding proposals. we'll, of course, hear back the league soon. And it does seem like they are moving closer to being more reasonable. And I think maybe the 76 games is at least the tip of the iceberg in that regard. We'll obviously keep you all up to date on the recent MLB proposals, and hopefully by next week and hopefully as soon as possible, we'll see a season. Nonetheless, thank you all for tuning into the Exit Velo podcast. This is not goodbye. This is see you later. Until next time.